Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining What is Ransomware and How to Protect Your Business, presented by myself, Jerry Friedman, Colden Company's Senior Sales Representative, and our President and Founder, Jim LaPointe. Just a little bit of housekeeping. All attendees are muted, but we do want your feedback, so please either use the chat button and send to all panelists or the Q&A box, and we will get to your questions either during the webinar or at the end. We are recording this webinar and we'll make it available to folks. So without any further ado, let's get rolling. First off, a little bit about Colden Company. We are an information technology service organization. We're coming up on our 13th year, founded in 2003. We have an office in upstate New York, Boston Spa, which is just by Saratoga Springs, and down in St. Augustine, Florida as well. We do have a pretty significant footprint through the country with customers in 21 states, as well as customers in Canada and Bermuda as well. And we do believe in being on the top of our game and getting constant training. So we do carry a number of certifications, but for the purposes of this discussion, the Security Plus and the CPCP, which is Certified Business and Continuity Planner, are the ones that really are germane to this discussion, because really you need security and business continuity and disaster recovery as an integral part of your business these days. So without any further ado, I will turn this over to Jim. Jim, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Jerry, and happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody. So let's dive right in here. What is ransomware? Essentially, ransomware is a virus. It's described as a class of malicious software that blocks access to data. That's typically done through encryption, and that data remains encrypted until a payment or a ransom is paid. Now, it's important to note that this virus will not only block access to data that is on your individual PC, but it's going to look to find ways to get out of your PC and onto other systems. So if you have a map drive to a server, as an example, it's going to reach out to that server and encrypt anything that it has permissions to encrypt on your server as well. If you have an external hard drive attached to your system, it's going to try to reach out to there and encrypt anything that's on there. So if that's what you're using as your sole means of backup, be advised that that external hard drive can also get infected and encrypted as well. The most common strain of ransomware is called CryptoLocker or CryptoWall, but it's important to note that there are many, many, many different flavors and different kinds of ransomware. There's not just one. There's not just one entity that's sending this out. There are many. And they're very prevalent, according to a study from Symantec, and this was in 2003 when ransomware viruses were fairly new. There were roughly 6,000 computers per day being infected with ransomware. And there's really no security professional on the planet today that thinks that that number has gone down. If anything, that number has increased. And there's a recent strain of ransomware called Locky that was out recently, and that infected 60,000 computers in the first 24 hours. So the reason these ransomware class of viruses are becoming so prevalent is because hackers have found a way to directly monetize their hacking. In older versions of viruses, what they would do is essentially try to get information in your system, try to get your passwords or account information, and then it would sell those passwords, and that's how these hackers would make their money, is through, I guess, the black market, if you will. But with ransomware, they really found a way to monetize directly to the end user and get you to pay them directly for their creation, which is unfortunately a terrible thing. According to a study from Bitdefender, just in the last 2 years, $325 million had been paid out in ransom. And keep in mind that these are in small payments. The typical payment is $300 to $500. We will give you some examples later of some larger numbers, but on average, they're really not large dollar amounts because they want you to pay. They want to give you a number that they think you can afford to get your data back. So accumulating $325 million in those small chunks just gives you an idea of how many people have been infected and how many people have had to resort to paying the ransom. The virus creators will typically request payment in either Bitcoin or some other type of service where they cannot be traced back. And without getting into a lot of detail on what Bitcoin is, it was really designed to be a global currency. You could use Bitcoin to pay for anything all across the world. It would be free from government manipulation. And as part of that Bitcoin project, you have what's called a Bitcoin wallet, where you create your own digital space, if you will, for your Bitcoins, and you use encryption to protect your information and protect your Bitcoin money from outsiders. And that encryption and that protection is what is allowing these criminals to stay hidden from authorities. So they're asking you to pay them in Bitcoin so that they can't be found and traced back. But essentially, your files will remain encrypted until you pay the ransom. Your options, if you get infected, are restore from backup, or if you don't have a good backup, pay the ransom. Those are the only two ways you're going to get your data back, unfortunately. We've had businesses call us saying, hey, we've got infected with ransomware, our backups weren't any good, and our IT company is telling us that there's nothing they can do with it. And is there anything you guys can do? And unfortunately, the answer is no, there really isn't. You should have had good backups to begin with. So that's something we're going to be stressing throughout the presentation, is relying on having a good backup is really the best defense here. Cold & Company, we have never paid ransom. We have had people that have been infected. We'll talk about what we've done since then, since these viruses first came out, to protect our customers. Sometimes the ransom will increase over time. They'll give you a period, maybe 72 hours, and on the next screen here, we'll have an example of what that screen might look like. And they'll give you instructions on how to pay, and they may increase that ransom over time if you don't make the first deadline. Or they might just destroy your decryption key, and then your data is essentially unusable from that point forward. Now, there have been cases where people have paid the ransom, and they don't get their decryption key. But on the whole, that's not the case. These guys, in general, do provide you the decryption key, because if word got out that paying the ransom wasn't doing any good, then people wouldn't pay the ransom, and they wouldn't have the income stream that they're getting from this. And as you can see, it's a sizable income stream that they're getting. Now, one last point here is, unfortunately, in the world we live in today, there's something called ransomware as a service. And what some of these hackers have done is set up a business helping other criminals set up ransomware attacks. They'll get you set up with the Bitcoin account, and they'll get you set up with the code to infect people's machines, and basically it's ransomware in a box. They charge other criminals money to help them get set up with their own version of ransomware. And that's why you see so many different variants and so many different types of ransomware viruses out there today. Okay, so who does ransomware attack? Really anyone with a computer, that is. Ransomware has been detected in just about every part of the globe. One that made news recently and was very high profile was Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center in California. And the reason that made such headlines is the ransom was significantly higher than people had been seeing before. It was a $17,000 ransom, not the typical $300 to $500. There's been several cases of police stations getting infected. They didn't have good backups, and even the police were resorted to paying the ransom. If you're a Mac user, you're not safe either. There is a variant called Key Ranger that is specifically designed to attack people on Macs as well. So really anyone is at risk here. And when we get into some of the details here, you'll see why really anybody with a computer is at risk here. Okay, so how do you get ransomware? Typically, it's called the payload, which is the portion of the virus that gets installed on your computer. That has been delivered typically through email attachments. And I would say 95% of the time that's the way it comes in. Somebody is clicking on an attachment that they shouldn't have, and they get the virus that way. Particularly in the early versions of the CryptoLocker viruses, there was an attachment called resume.zip. That was one of the early ones that came out, and that's how it got into people's systems. But it's not the only way, and that's what's important to know, is these viruses are continually evolving. They're getting more devastating. They're getting harder to detect, and they're adjusting along with the security companies that are trying to stop them. It's really become a game of cat and mouse between the security firms and the hackers. The hackers will come up with a new variant. The security companies will find it. They'll find a way to stop it, and the guys will adjust, the hackers will adjust and come out with a new variant. So they're always going to be staying one step ahead, and we had just an example of that come out this week, where a new variant of ransomware had come out. This was announced by a company called Malwarebytes. And the distribution method, you can see in the slide here, I've got email attachments, web browser vulnerabilities, and peer-to-peer file sharing, typically music sites. They found a new way this week, and that is through what they're called content delivery networks. So people that were going to very reputable sites like NewYorkTimes.com or BBC.com, MSN, these are sites that people go to on a regular basis. Now, those sites directly were not infected or infecting people, but the ads that they display on their sites, they found a way to infiltrate those. So if you were on a New York Times website and clicked on a particular ad, you could potentially get the ransomware virus. So that is something that is a new revelation that just was announced this week. This particular strain was very, very tricky. In the code, what they would do is first query your system and see what kind of security mechanisms you had. If you had good antivirus and good protections on there, that they wouldn't install. And the reason for that is they don't want to be found out. They want to infect as many computers as possible before being found out. So they were looking for a specific list of reputable antivirus programs and avoiding them and infecting systems that weren't well prepared. So it's been an escalation, I guess, in the cat and mouse game between the hackers and the virus creators. So you may not immediately know that you've been infected. So I'm going to click to the next slide here of how do you know? Well, you may not know right away. The way you'll find out is if you don't have access to some of your data. You try to open a spreadsheet or you try to open a Word document, and it's not going to say that it's encrypted. It's just going to say either the file is corrupt or can't open a particular file. That's going to be an indicator that something's going on here. Sometimes the file names will appear scrambled, and that was something new with the CryptoWall 4.0 version, is they actually went to the extra effort of encrypting your file name, so they would have a scrambled file name. And that's a telltale sign that you've been infected with the CryptoWall 4.0 version. Eventually, you will get a pop-up like the one shown here, and that will have instructions on how to pay for your decryption key. And it's important to note that it may not happen right away. And in the early versions, it did. As soon as you got infected, this thing would pop up telling you you had, in this case, 96 hours to pay. But the virus creators have gotten tricky and gotten smart, and they may download their payload onto your system and wait a couple days, and then release it and start encrypting your files and then have this message pop up. And the reason, again, for that is so that they can avoid detection. The longer they avoid detection, the more money they're going to be raking in here. So again, the telltale is you're not going to have access to some of your files. So what do you do if you suspect that you have it? Immediately unplug your computer from the network. If you're running a laptop and you're connected wirelessly, turn off your wireless. If you're plugged in through a wire, hardwire, unplug that immediately. You want to notify the appropriate resources in your company, and you want to follow your company policy for a virus breakout. Every company should have a documented policy that employees sign and understand because these viruses are only becoming more prevalent and more severe. What you don't want to do is act like our friend the ostrich here and stick your head in the sand. And early on, one of our customers did get infected with the early version of CryptoLocker, which was the original. He got that screen that popped up saying you need to pay a ransom. He didn't know what it meant, didn't understand it, and went home. And didn't tell anybody, didn't do anything. So the virus essentially had all night to encrypt as much data as possible. So time is critical here. The earlier you catch it, the less it's going to be able to encrypt and make your recovery that much easier if you're on it as quickly as possible. Okay, a common question that we get, well, why didn't my antivirus catch this? Many antivirus programs will not, and the reason for that is because the act of encrypting files in itself is not necessarily a virus. There are plenty of good business reasons to encrypt files for your own safety and security. So the antivirus programs, they can't differentiate between a malicious encryption of your data and a purposeful encryption of your data. Oftentimes, by the user clicking on a particular attachment, they're actually initiating the process. So the antivirus says, well, you clicked on it, you must know what you're doing. This must be a legitimate thing. So the antivirus companies have had to find different ways, different signatures in the virus itself to try to block it. And it's not as easy as blocking a traditional virus. Also, keep in mind the cat and mouse game that these guys are constantly evolving. They've got tremendous resources now because so many people have paid the ransom that they really have quite an effort behind them to stay one step ahead of the security firms. The attackers are relying on user error, clicking on an attachment that you shouldn't click on, and unpatched systems really to get into different systems. Okay, let's get into the protection end of things here and talk about what you can do to protect your data and to protect your business. First and foremost here is you want to make sure your systems are patched. Make sure that on your operating system level, you're getting the latest updates that come out with Microsoft monthly. If you're running Windows XP, please immediately go out and buy a new machine. That is not being patched anymore. You are definitely more vulnerable if you're still running Windows XP. There's much higher levels of risk there. More than just your operating system patching, make sure your browsers are up to date. And if you're on the call today and you're a current Golden Company customer, you're aware of this, as we reached out to all of our customers to let them know that Microsoft stopped patching older versions of Internet Explorer earlier this year. So we went through an effort with our customers to make sure everyone was running Internet Explorer 11, which is the current version and the one that will be patched going forward. People often ask me, what's the best browser for me to use? Some people have personal preferences of Chrome or Firefox over Internet Explorer. And my response to that question is use the browser that you're going to keep updated. It doesn't matter really which one it is. They're all going to have different vulnerabilities. And at some point in time, one may be better than another, but as long as you're keeping them updated, those are reputable browsers, but you want to make sure they're patched. Because really, when you're using a browser, you should have the mindset that you're in the danger zone when you're using your browser. If you're using Excel and you're working on a spreadsheet that's sitting locally on your computer or on your internal server, there's not as much risk there. But when you're browsing the internet, you're out there, your browser is interacting with foreign computers that you can't control. And this is the danger zone, and that's the way you should think about it. You should be very careful about your browsing habits. Okay, and of course, you want to keep your antivirus and your anti-malware programs up to date as well. But having said that, you could have a fully patched system with a fully patched browser, with a fully patched antivirus, and you could still potentially get a ransomware virus. And this is where bullet point number 2 comes in place here, where your user education is key as well. We have to start educating people to the threats that are out there. They are real, they are severe, and they're only becoming more common. So we have to inform users, do not open emails from people that you don't know. Don't open attachments from people, even if you do know them, if you're not expecting that attachment. If you get an email with an attachment, let's say I got one from Jerry. Of course, I know Jerry, but I'm not expecting that attachment. I'm going to pick up the phone and give him a call and say, hey, did you send me something with an attachment? And verify that that's a legitimate attachment before I go and open it. And if I'm unsure, I can always scan it with my antivirus engine as well before opening it. So user education is a key point here to stopping these ransomware attacks. Bullet point number 3 is have a quality spam filter. As we mentioned, the majority of the ransomware viruses have come in through email, so it's important that your spam filter be a good one. If you're using Office 365, that is built in. Microsoft has what they call Exchange Online Protection. That's a pretty good spam filter. If you're using Google Mail, Gmail, or Google Apps for work, Google bought a company called Postini several years back, which was really the gold standard for many years in spam filtering. And Google bought them and applied that to their Google Apps. If you're running your own in-house Exchange or some other type of email, it's important that you have a good quality spam filter that's going to be staying on top of the advances of these ransomware viruses. Number 4, you want to have a documented acceptable use policy so that your folks know what they can use the internet for and what they shouldn't be using it for. Have an affirmation that employees have read and understand your company policy. And that's something that we can and do assist our customers with, is developing good policies that you can incorporate into your company handbook. Next bullet point here is have a documented virus response policy as well. Continuing on the documentation front here, make sure employees know what to do if they think they've been infected, and not just pick up and go home for the day. Number 5, have 100% reliable backups and test those. Make sure you know that your backups are good by doing testing. As we mentioned early on, if you are infected, your 2 courses of action are go to your backups and restore, or pay the ransom. And we really strongly discourage people from paying the ransom. So that means you need to make sure that your backups are working, whether this is a personal machine or a business machine. Make sure your backups are working. Make sure you can restore from it in the event that you need to. So make sure you're testing that. Number 6, you want to use web content filtering. Now, what content filtering is, it's really restricting access to the internet or web access. Oftentimes what that's used for is to limit time-wasting sites, like you can block people from using Facebook at work, or this time of year it might be blocking March Madness streaming of basketball games or something like that. That's a typical use for content filtering. All content filters are not created equal, but what the better products will have is also some protection in there. So the one that we deploy and we recommend for our customers, it is continually updated with a list of known bad sites. So oftentimes people will get viruses and they don't mean to. They're not trying to do anything malicious. They're just trying to get the latest version of Adobe downloaded to their computer. And they put that in their Google search and they click on the first link that comes up. And it may so happen that that link leads them to a bad site. There was no malicious intent on the user's end, but yet they ended up with a virus. Using a good web content filter can help you avoid those situations. It will block access to those known bad sites. It'll pop up a message saying, basically that you're not allowed to go to that particular site, and prevent all the hassle. That's something that we're definitely recommending to every business out there. Is a lot of people have resisted content filtering because they don't want their employees to be upset about what sites they can and can't get to. But with the dangers that are out there and the severity of some of these viruses, you really have to take that extra precaution. Okay, bullet point number 7 here is to implement our specific anti-ransomware program. And as you've heard me say throughout the presentation here, we have been a victim of ransomware viruses, particularly early on. And we were trying to figure this out. We had updated antivirus, we had fully patched systems, we did our best to educate our users, and yet we still had some people getting affected. Now, we never paid a ransom. We take backups pretty seriously here, and we were always able to restore. However, we decided to do some deeper digging. We worked with some of our partners and found that these particular ransomware viruses, the way they work, we dug into the details and found that they execute from a particular protected area of your Windows operating system. And we found a way to block that. So even if someone does click on an attachment and they download the payload, when it goes to try to start encrypting your files, it's not going to allow it. So in essence, you do have the virus. You're just preventing the virus from doing what it wants to do. Now, we've actually had other IT companies call us. They heard about what we were doing, and we've shared our information. We're happy to share that for the betterment of everybody. But since we've implemented those changes, we have not had a single case of ransomware among our customer base that have implemented those precautions. Last but not least, there is now cyber insurance. So if all else fails, you can't get a cyber insurance policy, particularly if you're in a field like healthcare or finance where you're subject to HIPAA or maybe some financial regulations. You're going to be a lot more at risk here, so you can get a cyber insurance policy to protect your business. So be aware that that is available. Okay, so let's summarize here. Poorly protected networks and unaware users lead to people paying the ransom. And that in turn leads to more incentive for these guys to continue doing what they're doing. They're making a ton of money off of people that aren't well prepared. So what we're saying is don't be part of the problem. We want you to be part of the solution. Step number 1 is backups. Make sure that you have good backups. Make sure your backups are properly protecting you and that you can use that in the event of a disaster. As we're talking about, these viruses are evolving. They're becoming increasingly more devastating, so you want to be prepared. And I'm going to tell you about what's on the horizon here in terms of viruses. What we've seen out there with some of our security professionals is the next generation of viruses coming out. And what these are doing is when you get infected, it's actually corrupting the boot sector on your computer. So your computer will not boot. You go to restart and your computer is essentially a brick. Where I'm suspecting this is going to go is they're going to make that the next step in these ransomware viruses, where you're going to get a pop-up saying, pay our ransom or your computer is going to turn into a brick. Right now they haven't monetized that yet. They've just more or less probably experimenting with these viruses that are essentially just ruining people's computers. It's sad that they are doing this, but that's what we're seeing on the horizon here. So the bottom line is no security professional is seeing this threat going away or lessening. We just see it increasing and becoming more devastating. So us as the good guys and you as the end users need to be a part of the fight against these guys and be prepared. Okay, so here's just a list of some of our sources and our contact information. So at this point, what we'd like to do is open things up for questions. Jerry, do we have any questions that came in through the chat?
Yeah, we have 2 that have come in. The first one is somebody's asking, how do you actually get Bitcoin?
Okay, there are a number of, they call them exchanges. The most famous one is called Coinbase. They're based out of San Francisco. Actually, the most famous one might be one called Mt. Gox, which was a Japanese one that was closed down. But probably the most reputable place to go is Coinbase.com. And what they will do is not only will they sell you Bitcoin, but they will actually help you establish your Bitcoin wallet and set up that. And basically, they're going to keep track of your digital wallet for you. But you don't have to do that. You could do it yourself and set up your own encryption, and that would be even more private. There's a website, I think it's bitcoin.org is where you would go for the actual Bitcoin site. So I personally do have a Bitcoin account, and I got it through Coinbase.
Okay, and the second question, Jim, is all the talk about backup. What are the best backup tools? What are you guys recommending?
That is a good question. We're very high on image level backups, particularly for servers. The difference between an image level backup and a file level backup, the way I like to explain that is I use an analogy for watching a movie, comparing VCR to DVD. That's my comparison between file level and image level backups. And the example that I like to give is one of my favorite movies is A Few Good Men, and I like the courtroom scene. And if you have a VCR and you want to get to the courtroom scene, you have to hit the fast forward button and wait while it's fast forwarding through the tape to get to that particular scene. And that's where a typical file level backup that's backed up to tape works in a similar manner. If the data that you're backing up to tape is 3 hours into on that tape, you're going to have to wait 3 hours to get that data back. Whereas image level backups, where you're basically taking a snapshot of your server, it's more like a DVD. If you want to get to the courtroom scene, you just pick the scene and hit go, and you get right there. Essentially what you're doing is mounting a copy of your server, and basically you have access to the entire server at that particular point in time. So it also makes recovery much quicker and much more comprehensive, because the image level backups, you can think of them as making an exact copy of your server environment. You're getting everything from files to settings, users, everything, operating system, all wrapped into one backup. Any other questions at this point?
That was everything that came through the queue, but if anyone else has any additional questions, just send it through the Q&A or the chat, please.
Okay, I'm going to unmute the folks that are online as well. If anyone wants to say a question, that everyone's unmuted now, and feel free to ask. Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any further questions. So we definitely want to thank everybody for joining us today and learning about these ransomware viruses. If we can help you or your business prepare, our contact information is on the screen there. We are more than willing to help, or we want to be part of the battle here against the ransomware attacks here. So happy St. Patrick's to everybody, and thank you very much for attending.